Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Ryan Heckman, the CEO of Rally Day Partners, and this is the Founders Journey podcast. We'll explore the heart and soul of great founders and their journey to build the company of their dreams. You will learn about new industries and business models while discovering how to apply the founder's mindset to your everyday work and life. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Founders Journey podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Heckman, CEO of Rally Day Partners. As many of you know, we started doing this podcast a couple years ago, principally because I was having these conversations with these extraordinary people anyway, and I often regretted not having hit record. And the conversation we're going to have today is so quintessential, and I've really been looking forward to this. I'm joined by David Gardner, the co-founder, heart and soul of Motley Fool. We'll talk a bit about Motley Fool for those of you who may not remember or were not contemporaries at that time. But I first want to welcome David. Thank you, David, for being on our podcast.
Thank you, Ryan. One founder to another, and I know many others listening. I really appreciate the invite.
We were introduced by our chief purposologist, Haley Rushing. I do want to give both of us a chance to give her a shout out. She's such a humble person, but touches so many lives, and we wouldn't be here without Haley. David, how did you meet Haley?
I first met Haley at the Conscious Capitalism CEO Summit in Austin, Texas, probably somewhere around the year 2009. So I've known Haley for almost 20 years, and mainly she's just been a friend, somebody who is a like-minded fellow traveler who, along with you, Ryan, and many other conscious listeners, believe that business can be a very powerful force for good. It's not just about doing well, it's about doing good. And ironically, the more good you do, the more well you do. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. But I do believe in Haley's heart and in her life's work, that comes through so clearly. And she just tends to hang out with cool people that I like to hang out with too. So that's my quick thought about Haley. There are many other things we could say about her, how brilliant and bright she is, how brand-minded, brand-building she is, and the work that she's done. And I know she's worked with you, Ryan, so I assume I have most of this right?
Yeah, I mean, we met through similar serendipity, I suppose.
On the ski slopes?
No, we met, there was a founder here in our office who had built a really beautiful business. And as I often do, I asked them, what was the turning point for them, either personally or organizationally. And this guy said, you know what? I started doing better after I met Haley Rushing.
Wow. Love it.
And I love that expression, doing good actually helps you do better or do well. And when I first heard that, I thought to myself, it's sort of like if eating ice cream every night helped you lose weight. And I wish that were true as well. I have a vice of eating ice cream at the worst time of the day, apparently at midnight. And I wish that helped me lose weight. But anyway, so I hate it when I listen to a podcast and the host talks too much, but I have to set the table here. So if you would indulge me, David, and listeners,
Great.
I want to take us back to 1994. I think it was a consequential time for the global economy and for the United States, and for me personally at the same time. And that's when I first met your company, David. So I felt compelled to set the table in this way. So 1994, that was the year Friends started. all of us had a debate which of either Courtney Cox or the other we were interested in, and all the ladies in my world were debating whether it was Joey, Chandler, or Ross in terms of their crush. But that was the year Friends came out. NAFTA was passed by then President Bill Clinton, which kind of was the beginning of globalization for all intents and purposes. A few companies started then, Netscape, Yahoo, Amazon, and you might say that was the beginning of, kind of the golden age of the internet, which then led to all the other crazy stuff that we both get delight from and are confronted with today. Nelson Mandela became president of South Africa. The Rwanda genocide occurred. By some estimation, 600,000 people died. Anyway, I think I was like 17 or 18. And so when we think about consciousness I was very conscious in 1994. I had moved away from home to pursue my skiing life. I was then had completed my second Olympic Games in Lillehammer, Norway. That was the year Tanya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan had their.
I certainly remember the incident. I couldn't have quoted the date. Thank you for this tour back through history, which does feel very fresh, I think, to both of us, but to others, it might sound like ancient days.
It does. And for me, I had not gone to high school because I was training for my sport and was feeling stupid I don't know what the right word is, but I was feeling stupid. And I was also feeling really poor. And those are not good things. And I wanted to keep skiing because I was just getting sort of good at it at that time. I was racking my brain that if I was going to be stupid, somehow could I be rich instead? And what could I do in my free time to create some money while I was still pursuing my sport? And I had two big ideas. One was my coach was a contractor in the summertime, so I was going to hire him to build me a duplex and rent it out and collect rent money. So that was one idea. And the second idea was I was going to buy stocks. And there, I thought a cool strategy would be to look at new products that I thought were cool and that maybe were popular in Europe, where I was spending half of my time, that just hadn't hit the mainstream in the US. And in both cases, I didn't have any money. And so it was hard to make money without it. But I lived with a community banker in my little town of Steamboat Springs. And I had a Snapple for the first time. This was like a drink. It was kind of a fruit drink, and they had about a half dozen flavors at the time. And I love these things. And I went to my banker, who was probably in his 70s at the time, and I said, I really love these drinks, and I want to buy the stock. It had just gone public in 1994. And he said, well, why the hell would you buy such a small, inconsequential business? You should buy Coca-Cola. And so he took me to the library, and he pulled out these hard copy books called Morning Star. And Morning Star had rated Coca-Cola 5 out of 5 stars and talked about things like beta and trading volumes and float and all these things. And they rated Snapple a 1 out of 5 stars. And the old banker fellow, Ed Hill, love Ed, he said, well, see what I mean? And lo and behold, probably about 9 months later, Snapple sold for $1.7 billion to Quaker Oats, and the stock tripled. And he had an AOL account. And I learned this news on AOL. And while I was on AOL, I stumbled across Motley Fool. And for me, feeling stupid, I found a place where I could feel belonging and that looked at companies in the same way I was trying to naively around like cool companies and not companies with low volatility, which we all know are two different things.
Really well said, Ryan. Keep going. I absolutely love this story. This is so capital F foolish. Keep going.
So I'll get to the punchline, I promise. Tell me in 1994, when you and your brother, Tom, I think is his name, started Motley Fool, what was happening in your life at that time? And did you have any idea at that time that you would write 5 to 7 or whatever, so many books, and almost create a brand of investors who were not picking up cigar butts off the ground like Benjamin Graham, and would find the right brain and spirituality of investing in companies with no track record like an Amazon, and build a community around this new way of thinking? Like, did you know at that time, David, that you were onto something? And what was going through your head?
Well, first of all, Ryan, I absolutely love your story, as I already said. So thank you so much for sharing it, because what you've shared is just the authentic place that you started from. And almost all of us started there in some variation of that. Very few people grew up thoroughly understanding the stock market, how to invest. Of course, there's not one way. There are many ways. Most of us just stumble and bumble our way into, okay. The biggest trick for most of us is just saving money. That's actually harder than investing. But to answer your question, as we started the Motley Fool, I had come from one previous job, and I would say that's the only job I ever had because everything
I'm sorry to date you, but how old were
Sure.
you at this time of your life?
Yeah. So we actually started in 1993 as a print newsletter. We debuted on AOL in August of 1994. And in August of 1994, I was 28.
Wow.
So I was in my mid to late 20s when we started The Fool. And I had a few things going for me. First of all, I had a father who loved the stock market. And he taught Tom and me about companies. And he did it through not Morningstar, but Value Line, which is an even older school product, but a big, thick black tome with lots of numbers in it in an age before the internet, where to actually have numbers was a real dear commodity. I mean, you had to pay up for data that today we take for granted should be free. So we had a dad who loved the stock market, loved his kids. And as I've often told, it's a simple and true story. We would go to, in Washington, D.C., where I grew up, we would go to Safeway Saturday morning where dad would get groceries and he'd say, hey, kids, look, chocolate pudding. We love chocolate pudding, right? We own some of the shares of the company that makes that chocolate, but let's go get more chocolate pudding. And so it's your story about ice cream, except substitute chocolate pudding. And while it may not have been the healthiest thing for us, what he did from early days for us was connect this idea that the products and services that we love, the things we're wearing right now, the things in our fridge, the things on our smartphone, we can be part owners of the companies that make those products and services. So that was a powerful, important lesson from early days for us. But I'll also say that, Ryan, I came out of university, in my case, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and I didn't have a clear idea of what I wanted to do. And I kind of kicked around for a couple of years, freelance writing, getting rejected a lot, feeling stupid, like you watching my peers, very talented graduates of UNC Chapel Hill, go on to business school or their first promotion or medicine, law. And I was sort of 24 now, trying to figure out what I was going to do. Also, I got married. Fortunately, that's worked out really well 40 years later. But I got married without a job. So I finally did start my first job, and I wrote for Louis Rukeyser, who had a show called Wall Street Week on PBS. It was the longest running show on public television. I see you nodding your head. We're an audio podcast, so others may not be able to see, but a lot of older ears will remember Rukeyser, and he was witty, and he would just review what had happened in the markets for the previous week every Friday evening. Lots of people's dads, some moms, probably more dads though, would sit around and watch PBS and have Louis Rukeyser explain to us what had happened on Wall Street and for our personal fortune. And he had a lot of wit, as I mentioned, which I liked a lot. So I wrote for his newsletter. I got a job writing, not for the TV show, but for his newsletter. It wasn't a great job, though. It wasn't Lou's fault. It was just sort of a creatively deadening job. I could go there more, but it's not really pertinent to our conversation. But I basically said, guys, I think I'm going to quit this job because I'm not feeling this. And I did. So after only 6 months, that was the only job. And now it was time to figure out what I would do at the age of 27. And the answer was I was going to just start writing a newsletter, just like I'd been writing for Rukeyser, except that this time I was going to get to put it in my own voice, choose a name for it with my brother and his friend from college. And we were going to start something called the Motley Fool. And we're going to teach people about the stock market and investing. And, you know, I'll just fast forward really quickly because I don't think we want to stay there too long unless you want to go back there, Ryan. But we started answering people's questions in this new dawning medium online, right? You remember we had our computers using the phone line, hooking up to other computers. That's how the internet started. The phrase World Wide Web would not reach currency until after we'd started the Motley Fool. But there you were on AOL. We were keyword fool. And there we were basically answering people's questions as paying customers of AOL. And we got written up in the Wall Street Journal and Forbes for an April Fool's joke that we played where we made up a penny stock and hyped it in order to point out to people they shouldn't invest in penny stocks. And it was really funny what we did, and it got some national attention. All of a sudden, AOL said, wait, these guys are just customers on our service. Do they want to open up their silly newsletter, Motley Fool, on AOL? And we said, yeah, heck yeah. And so that's really how the Motley Fool started. And we launched in August of 1994, as I mentioned. by the summer of 1996, this just shows the ascent that we were on. We were on the cover of Fortune magazine. So from a standing start with a newsletter for only our parents' friends, a print newsletter, because they were the ones who pay us $48 a year, inside of 3 years, we were all of a sudden there. And you remember those heady days. You did a great job summarizing 1994. There were lots of things of consequence, but I would say most of all, looking backwards, it was the dawn of a new medium, an incredibly powerful medium that in some ways does what all other media do. Online incorporates music, it incorporates video, it incorporates text and commerce and all the rest. And that was just starting then. And we were incredibly fortunate to be positioned in the relatively random place that we were.
I mean, I as you were talking, I was asking questions in my head, so I'll try to remember them. But is it true that, I know it's not now because you said this company started in August of 94, but the folklore is that it started on April Fool's, or that at least April Fool's Day got you on the map. Is that true?
So April Fool's Day of 1994 was when we played our online joke. And again, we created an account of somebody who was a hypester, hyping a penny stock. We're lampooning a behavior we were observing that we didn't like. And the thing about our penny stock hypester is he had a bigger ego than all the others, and he was an incredible trash talker, and he had a stock that was exciting that you were reading about that was at 37 cents a share, and he was pretty much guaranteeing that it would be at $1.75 within 2 weeks, because that is what we were observing online. By the way, this still happens today. Some people call it meme stocks, but anyway, I guess everything old becomes new again. But so it was April Fool's Day of 1994, Ryan, that really got us. We were not expecting to get national attention or get written up, but that did really accelerate the growth and start of the Motley Fool.
And maybe opened you and your brother's eyes to very intimately the power of the internet in terms of distribution. I mean, like mailing your newsletter out, that's pretty brutal.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was the guy. I remember sending out 1,000 print copies. So there I am with Microsoft Publisher, which before Microsoft Office was the desktop publishing program. And I had been the editor-in-chief of my high school yearbook. So I had some skills, but that's about where they ended. And so there I am with Microsoft Publisher printing off on my laser printer 1,000 copies of a 12-page newsletter and then mailing it to anybody I could think of that might subscribe. That included like our cousin's wedding list. He had just gotten married in Minnesota or North Dakota, and we just got 100 people there. I got my high school graduation class of 80. We just started trying to think anybody that we could send this to. Again, 1,000 copies, and we got 48 subscriptions about a month later, and I was crestfallen.
And how many people do you think saw your April Fool's thing on AOL? I mean,
yeah, I can't know, but first of all, it was definitely hundreds of people who were online at the time. But then when that gets written up in the Wall Street Journal or Forbes, I can't explain to you what that would be. But most of all, I was just crestfallen that we only got 48 subscriptions, Ryan, because I was like, I just sent this out to everybody who loves us. And then I was having a cocktail in Washington, D.C. later that month with somebody who was in the direct marketing industry. And he said, I'm sorry, what? You got 48? I said, yeah, 48. We sent out so many. He's like, that's a 4.8% response rate. That is much higher than you should have expected. And I started thinking, all right, well, I'm learning the world of business. And so, I did not come out of UNC Chapel Hill expecting to be an entrepreneur. And I'm so glad I ended up one.
The name Motley Fool is supposedly from Shakespearean irony or literature where the court jester actually was a source of wisdom. Was it that deliberate, or were you just like making your own joke like about the finance industry at that time? I mean, what was the genesis of the name?
Yeah, it was very intentional. I was the one who picked it. I was flipping through a book of quotations one night in bed going, what are we going to call this print newsletter? And I just remembered studying Shakespeare's Fools in college. And I specifically was flipping through the Penguin Book of Quotations, and there it was, Act 2, Scene 7 of As You Like It. I didn't know this at the time, but that is, in all of Shakespeare, that is the one scene that most deeply, beautifully celebrates fools, foolishness, court jesters. It is an amazing scene, but at the time it was just a quote. And the quote was nondescript, but it said, a fool, I see a fool in the forest, a motley fool. And I sat there going, that's actually kind of a fun place to be coming from. because I'm not ever going to put myself out as a Shakespeare scholar, but I'm certainly Shakespeare. I have Shakespeare affinity, and I have a love of literature and wisdom. And this idea that you could be coming from a place of humility where you're saying ahead of time, you're actually identity branding yourself if you're a court jester, or in our case, saying we're fools. And by the way, you're going to be wrong a lot. So I've picked probably more bad stocks than anyone else in my company's history, which is always important to point out. And we could talk about that later if you like. And when I do, I'm like, hey, I said I was a fool. I didn't pretend to be, a big expert, and I never will. And it's also fun when you win. And I know I'm talking to an Olympian. I'm talking to somebody who has a lot of experience with winning, and I'm sure losing too. But when you win, it's awfully fun to say, well, those other guys are pretty wise. Those Wall Street people, whoever you're regarding as your authority or source, those people are pretty wise. We're fools, though, and this is how we do what we're doing. So I loved that positioning. I could not have understood at the time that it would be positioned online, or that it would ultimately lead to a brand that was a foil to Wall Street's wisdom.
While you were talking, this is the first trophy I ever won.
Beautiful.
This was the advice my coach told me when I was about 10 years old, and it reads, winning requires lots of losing.
Love that. That to me is, if there are 3 important lessons in life, that would be one of them. That's on my Mount Rushmore of what we all need to understand. And I think I don't want to take us off the rails here, so I'm just going to make a brief point. But I think a lot of people, in a way I didn't understand and have never felt myself, but a lot of people have a lot of negative self-talk. For whatever reason, I was raised under a cheerful, positive, I've always had that about me. But what I've since learned as I've got to know our fellow humans is a lot of people talk themselves down, which I don't. But I realize losing to win, therefore, is such a powerful, important concept that people need to embrace and inculcate in themselves, because, you've done a lot more winning than most of us ever will, Ryan. And look what your coach said, and look what's there on your first trophy. Maybe my favorite section of my final investing book, which was just published a few months ago, Rule Breaker Investing, is entitled Losing to Win. And we can talk, again, if we want to go there, I don't want to take us off the rails. We can talk a little bit more about the numbers of losing to win for investors. And talking to somebody from private equity or venture capital, a lot of professionals would understand that you actually have to lose a lot. As you invest broadly, you're going to understand you're going to be losing. And yet the winners win, if you're doing it right, so grandly that they wipe out your losers. But many people never have that insight. They never get to that mountaintop and see that view. They're just afraid. They're terrified of losing and protecting against the downside. And I think something was miswired in me, because I've never been that way. I'm happy just to keep losing and looking silly and airball it from the free throw line 10 times in a row if my 11th pick is NVIDIA or Amazon.
Well, I think it's a natural segue eventually to those 3 things, your Mount Rushmore pieces of advice. I would like to, we just heard one of them. Maybe we could dig a little deeper into that, maybe go through the other 2. But before we do that, I'm dying to know, when you saw you and your brother, and I swear I can remember it, it was you guys in vertical with you at the court jester hat, I think, or maybe that was the cover of your book. But when you saw yourself on the cover of Fortune magazine, did you feel cool? Did you feel like, I told you so? Give me the real version. What did David feel at that time? And what did you do the first time you saw it?
Yeah, I think that I would have been just incredibly happy and surprised. And that was the feeling that we had for the early years of our enterprise, because we were constantly being surprised by how much bigger the world could be for us and how much more we could try to do and reach in the world. So there was a sense of blue ocean. There was a sense of manifest destiny. I remember saying manifool destiny to our employees. The sense, in early U.S., it's sort of sad now, regrettably, because we realized that we went over an entire people in order to go east to west in this country, settlers, and there's not a very positive view of that in many ways anymore. But they were driven by a sense of destiny. And all of a sudden I was like, wow. I feel like we understood the internet and how to interact well ahead of most people. I remember that on AOL, we were competing against magazines, brands like Time Magazine, let's say, but they were just copying and pasting their articles. And that was their online site. And we were there basically writing fresh content, generating audio and video, and responding and building community. And AOL loved that about us. And I think that's in part why we ended up on the cover of Fortune magazine. I try not to be a prideful person, but I would have to say, without being cocky or arrogant, I think there was a deep sense of fulfillment at a young age. And then such excitement about the possibilities going forward, which I still mostly feel now in my very late 50s, knowing that we've also lost grandly at different points as well. But I think there was a sort of a coming of age moment, Ryan, for us and our organization, because it sort of branded us and made us like, oh, look, we're real. Like people were sort of, understandably, we encouraged them to do so, mocking us. Who are these fools on the internet? Telling people to buy stocks. It sounded very irresponsible. Hyping things in chat rooms is how people, we were always mocking people who would hype anything when it came to stocks, but there was a distrust of the internet and online that you'll remember. Our whole society needed to understand eventually that this is here to stay, and that was not at all the conventional wisdom in 1994.
That's really well said. If you were to flex, and I know it's hard for you, I can feel that. I think our listeners can feel your humility. But at Motley Fool's peak, and you were talking to your granddaughter, if you were going to tell her about you and Motley Fool at its peak, I mean, and you could flex a little bit, and with humility, just talk about your significance, not your success, but your significance. How would you describe Motley Fool at its peak, and what year do you think that was?
So I would say that it is yet to come.
Aha, very well said.
So I would start, we're now in our 34th year of doing business, and we're certainly bigger than we were back then. So I would start by saying, look what's happening in the world right now. Her name is Sahana. And so I would say, Sahana, what do you see? Do you see an online site, an app? Do you see people that we've never met before? We can go to any city and meet with people who say, I'm a fool. I'm a fool too. I believe in what you're doing. People who are conscious capitalists, something that you and I both deeply love. I served on the national board for a bunch of years and have always been connected. I would say, do you see examples of conscious capitalism in the world at large? So I think my company will outlive me. I hope that it will continue to grow over time. So when I think about peaks, I think about the future, not the past.
All right, I'll ask it a different way. When did you realize the significance of what you were building? And when did you, and I'm supposing your brother Tom, have that sense of significance?
So I think ours is just a very unusual trajectory because we did start just as a new medium took off. And in the same ways that the early days of television probably felt very promising and heady, but also questionable, and radio, and how those have changed and deepened society. If you were there early, you probably have this sense that you right away were understanding earlier than most people that what you're doing is going to be consequential. So, Ryan, I think most of us in business feel like we probably need to hack at it for 6 to 10 years before we start going, okay. But I would say almost from we started as a newsletter, again, for our parents' friends, with an AOL site, hired our first employee. I think at that point we started to see, because we're on AOL's main screen, we get written up in the New Yorker in its Talk of the Town section. We have Simon & Schuster reaching out to us going, hey guys, just heard about you. We think there's a book here. We launched a national radio show that eventually went to NPR. All of this was within the first 5 years of what we were doing.
Holy smokes.
So it's not like, it took us a long time to see that this was going to matter. And I also want to make it clear that you're right. We started around the same year Amazon, Yahoo, et cetera. We started years before Google. We started years before Airbnb and Uber. We're tiny compared to them. So it's not like I'm speaking as a titan of business with my, 12-figure valuation. I'm very proud of what we've done. I love our company and what we stand for. And I've certainly created more wealth than I ever would have dreamed. So I'm very happy to say it. But I also want to make sure people know that, we're smaller than a lot of companies that came after us. That includes so many like discount brokers. Back in the day, that was like a new trend. And many of our early advertisers, when we were a free site for some years, were companies that today are much larger than we are. Robinhood showed up way after the Motley Fool and is way bigger than the Motley Fool. So, I want to make sure people know that even though I saw from early days with eyes of discovery and exploration that this was going to be something really special, it's not like I'm sitting here saying we're on top of the world today. Not at all.
On that discount broker thing in 94, Charles Schwab was around then, right? Like that was a thing?
Sure was, yeah.
I mean, obviously not what it is today. Was index investing a thing in 1994?
It was.
Yeah.
And, Jack Bogle, who's certainly one of our heroes, who started Vanguard, we were significant fans of Jack. I love Jack. He's no longer with us on this planet, but his character, let alone his vision and what he's done for investors, is peerless in my mind. He is a genius. And we had one very strong disagreement with him, which, may get us into a portion of our conversation where we talk about how the investment world is set up and what people think and what the Motley Fool is here to challenge. But I would say there were two dominant forces or theories that were around back then. One was index investing, Ryan, and the other was Warren Buffett and his, again, hero, amazing perspective and culture that he's built up around his company. But those two dominant forces created a vacuum that I realized some years early on that we could fill, even though we didn't do so consciously. This is more me looking backwards now, realizing it, because you have two dominant messages, not just in the 1990s, but also in the 2000s and the teens and the 2020s. You got two dominant messages. The first, which owns, I would say, the pole position today, is that you shouldn't even bother picking stocks. That's a gamble. It's probably a waste of time. You're just as likely to beat the market averages as a blind monkey throwing darts, etc. And so much money is indexed today. And the message is, the secondary message is, don't even bother trying. But then the second dominant school, which is a rival of Jack Bogle, is Warren Buffett. You should bother picking stocks. And yet, Buffett has a specific slant that the world has worshipped small w in a way that he has earned and deserves. But it's such a dominant message that people didn't see a third way. The dominant message is avoid technology, buy things that will be around with confidence 10 years from now. Avoid technology, buy brands that we can understand, Geico, Say's Candies, avoid technology. And so what ended up happening, I've realized now, is that I basically have created my own little school of investing called rule breaker investing, where we go specifically against the rules that are largely set by Bogle and Buffett. And that is what enabled me to pick from early days Amazon, Nvidia, Tesla, Netflix, all of these as public companies, not as, I'm not a VC. I'm just a mom and pop investor. And almost all of the companies I just mentioned and many others, no one in the Buffett crowd would touch, including Buffett himself. And so when you really think about that, the world was set up by Goliaths. There were two of them, not just one as in the Bible. And they were Buffett saying, avoid those kinds of companies because you really can't know. And then Bogle saying, don't even buy stocks at all. And there you and I were. You're there in 1994 going, I might be kind of a ski bum, except I'm not really. I'm an Olympian and I need to figure out what to do with my money. And, maybe Snapple would be a company that I would want to own some shares of. And, that was true for me for Starbucks, which is how I opened up my book. And the list goes on. And these, all of the Bogle crowd saying, don't ever even buy Starbucks. That's a gamble and you don't know how it will work out. And Buffett's saying, it's overpriced. It's a fad. Stay away from Starbucks. Stick with the good old tried and true, in your words, Coca-Cola, relating it directly back to your experience, Ryan, which you related here on our podcast together, which is a classic Buffett stock and has been dramatically outperformed by other companies in the same industry. And again, Buffett has done great and he is beloved and rightly so, but there's such an industry promoting that it opened up an incredible vacuum for rule breakers for me to fill, I think. And so that's how I sort of look back now on that time and what I've tried to do in my career.
I choose to believe that Warren Buffett would agree with you, but we can debate that at a different time, even though it would be against his orthodoxy. Anywho, so for those of you who can't see David, I would just describe him as a very friendly face. He's immediately when we got on the podcast kind of recording thingy, I think it's called Riverside or something. Yeah, Riverside. it was immediate connection, even through the screen. We've never met one another. You might say, like, David has never met a stranger. You might say that somehow you feel better about yourself within 30 seconds of talking to David, as I did. But given, I mean, if there's one kind of secret to ruin, it's really fast success. You know, like you look at people in Hollywood, you look at sports, and I mean, if there's one common trait among the assholes, it's typically that they got success sooner than most, more quickly than most, maybe a little easier than most by appearances. And somehow that made them not humble. How did you and how have you kept your foolhardy humility?
Well, just by going through the school of hard knocks and by going through life. And I think for me, it's been very helpful from day one of being a public brand that I'm a fool and that as employees, we're fools. And what did the fool do? The fool was never the king or the queen. The fool was there whispering into the king or queen's ear advice, the only member of the Elizabethan court who had license to tell the truth to the king or queen. And that's all the fool will ever be. The fool will never be the king or the queen. So, I mean, I would say just the persona that we adopted. I'm not wearing my jester cap today because, you know, it's just an audio podcast. Although, wait, what am I saying? Of course I'm going to wear my
There it
jester
is.
cap
Oh my
today.
God. It's
So I'm
so
always
good.
ready with my jester cap, and I'll always be a fool. Like, there's nothing else that I aspire to be. I love this positioning. So if you do, then you're inviting people to call you fool. And that's people's kids. That's people older than you. You're just saying, hey, I'm a fool. And you need to live up to it, right? And I mean that in the best sense of the term, because we draw a hard line distinction between foolishness and foolishness, capital F, small f. And of course, small f is what we've all heard growing up with. A fool and his money are soon parted, small f, etc. But capital F, foolish and fools, those are the wise counselors that Shakespeare loved, that used humor in order to teach and have always been so compelling to me, and wore a silly, floppy, colorful cap. This is not just, for Hollywood in 2020. Like, this is what literally people were doing centuries ago. And that's the position from which they came. So I think that would always keep us humble. But if I didn't need my full cap to keep me humble, I'd also say all of the bad stocks that I've picked. And you and I already had a brief conversation about losing to win. And also as an entrepreneur, because that's a big part of my journey. One of my favorite Buffett lines is, I'm a better investor because I'm a businessman, and a better businessman because I'm an investor. In fact, in old school Fool HQ, we had that blown up, the biggest font size painted on our wall of our most prominent conference room, because I think that's such an important take. And we do live in a society where many people disconnect those. They think, I'm in business, but I can't, I give my money away to my money guy. I'm not going to spend time with that. I don't understand what's going on there. I don't want to spend my time there. And then on the other side, there are people who are just investing, but have very little business experience. They've got their trade station. They've got their apps. I'm not sure what they have. They've got their zigs and zags on their charts they're looking at. They don't have any personal experience working within a for-profit company, especially in a startup environment. But if you actually connect those two, if you try to cultivate both sides of your brain, both parts of your human experience, it's not just a 2D plane that you're circling back and forth. Investing business, it's actually a gyre that goes up. It's 3D. The better you get at one, the better you're going to get at the other. And so that's been really important for us as well. So I think that losing is part of that. And as an entrepreneur, since I'm briefly speaking to that, Ryan, we could go there more. But, there we were hiring our first employee going, I think this is a thing now. My gosh. And 6 years later, with 435 employees, we did our first layoff in the year 2001. As all of a sudden, the stock market starts to implode. And a lot of the companies like AOL, Amazon, stocks that we had been early backers of with very low cost bases, all of a sudden started dropping precipitously. And as entrepreneurs, our advertisers started canceling. And we were saying, wait, we're just bringing you just as much audience as we did last quarter. What's going on here? And they're like, well, we don't have as much ad spend. We're not going to spend as much. And so all of a sudden, we let go 100 of our 435 employees. And that'll keep you humble. And I remember with Tom and our team back then, we were like, well, that was brutal. March of 2001. We're never going to have to do that again, though. And by June, we started to realize, OMG, we're going to have to do another layoff. Things got worse. And so we let 100 more go. And at that point, yes, we are trial by fire. That's when you really start to realize the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur. And we said, well, at least we're not going to have to do that ever again. And then 9/11 happened, and the World Trade Center came down here in Washington, D.C. The Pentagon got hit. The stock market closed down for a few days, and we realized we're going to have to let another 100 plus go. And so within 9 months, we went from 435 employees to just 85 employees. And by the end, we were laying off family members, people who traveled across the country to come work for our company. It was shocking. And so just as precipitous as our rise had been, actually, it was even more precipitous, the drop, because it took us 6 years to build to there. And then 2001, which was devastating for our world and our country and our economy, let alone our little company, we felt the sting of that, and we had to rebuild from that point forward. And there's a lot more I could share. I don't think we're doing a full entrepreneurial journey here. We're doing a founder's journey, and especially focusing on those early days. But when you ask me, Ryan, is it hard for me to stay humble? The answer is absolutely not. And by the way, I picked so many bad stocks since then, even though I also have some tremendous winners that I'm very proud of. So it's all mixed. It's all together. And I also want to just say thank you very much for the kind words you said about me. I didn't know what you were going to say. You certainly didn't have to say those things. But I feel similar positive energy from you. And I know that's how you roll through this world. When people get to meet you, listen to you, work with you, get invested in by you, they are getting a person of quality. And in the end, what underlines all of this for me is character. So more important than business or investing is what's underneath that, because that usually, in the words of Henry Cloud, who once wrote, I love this line, character always wins. And that's really what I try to cultivate and what I try to surround myself with.
Did he write that book, Integrity? Is that the author?
Yeah, he wrote the book Integrity, and I loved that book. And that's exactly, that book is where that line, he's written other books too, but that book is where that simple line comes from. Now, I'm quite sure he's not the first to have said it. Pretty sure this goes back to the Greeks, but I relate it to Henry Cloud's book, Integrity.
Yeah, I think that what struck me about that book, I mean, I grew up hearing that word a lot. And in sports, you call it sportsmanship, but it's the same thing. But I guess Henry Cloud illuminated that integrity isn't necessarily a moral dimension. It's more in the structural integrity realm of being able to go through what you and your brother did in those years and show up in the same way with the same blueprint of your soul and the experience that people have with you when you're under that kind of duress, or when you're wildly successful, you're the same person with the same heart of gold. And that's really hard to do, as we both know.
Well, thank you. I agree with that. I love the point that Cloud makes. You summed it very well, Ryan. In fact, it's been years since I read the book, so I was half forgetting that. But for him, the word integrity is like a hull of a ship. If you have a single leak, the ship goes down. So integrity isn't about telling the truth every time or whatever we think of that word means. For him, and then for me as his reader, and you're reminding me, it's actually making sure you don't have a hole. Because if you do, that can sink the whole enterprise. That's true of enterprises we manage. That's true of ourselves as people, et cetera. And by the way, we're all faulty. But we're also all changing all the time. And that's worth pinching yourself and remembering. You know, another great book is James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. Many of us have read that. Many of your listeners will already know that, but I was just reviewing it again recently. I had James on my podcast 6 years ago this week. In fact, it was 6 years ago, April Fool's Day. I know you and I, this podcast will appear some weeks later, but we're recording just the day after April Fool's. And what James talks about is that when you take actions and turn them into habits, they become identity creators. And so you're able to say all of a sudden, I'm a ski jumper. And it's not because you're an Olympian. It's because you actually put skis on that morning and jumped. You know, you hit a little mogul and made a jump. And this is especially great for little kids who are just starting. You're a ski jumper now. But it's not just true of little kids, it's true all of us as adults. The things that we do are creating the characters that we are, and it's much more about the future than the past, even though, in a sense, the present is all of the assembled moments of our past. So I'm a big recreate yourself all the time person, and that's helpful if you're an entrepreneur, I suspect.
I want to get to your Mount Rushmores of, I'd say, principles, David Gardner principles. Before we do, I do want to just double click on what you said about when you say you're a fool, it gives you license maybe to be a bit more authentic and more curious and not set yourself up for either self-judgment or judgment from others. And when you fail, it's like, well, yeah, I get it. I'm a fool. And to your point on investing versus being a business person, I mean, Rally Day was kind of built on this premise. The four managing partners of our firm have all been founders and CEOs. And in the investing world, the private equity world, believe it or not, that's like really distinctive and uncommon. And I laugh because when you're a new parent or you're about to become a new parent, you definitely aren't going to call your single friend who is still living in a bachelor pad to ask them, what you do when your baby's up every 30 minutes at 2 a.m. You're going to call someone who's been a parent, who has lived through those experiences. And for the founders that we get to support with our investment dollars, for them to choose to go to a private equity firm led by people who have never built a business, it just strikes me as unusual. I kind of get it because they're two different things, but I left the investing world after doing it for 15 years to go be a CEO. I mean, I was successful and I built a great organization, but it was so hard. And over 5 years, I left, after selling my business and creating the business of my dreams in many ways, but it was like really damn hard. And I noticed when I came back to private equity after that experience, I saw things in 3D for the first time. I might put it differently, but the way you described the effect when you have both sides of yourself activating at the same time, being in 3D, I felt like when I looked at a business before having been a CEO and a founder, it felt very two-dimensional. It was kind of black and white, like a black and white picture or an X-ray versus a CAT scan. And then on the other side, I think if I were going to go back and be a CEO a second time, I'd like to think I would have been a better business builder at after this number of years, 27 years doing this. But that symbiosis is something I've never heard someone talk about, David, as well as this kind of beginner's mindset. As a leader, do you think a beginner's mindset gives you license to become better with your people and this foolishness that you talk about? Are they the same thing?
I really appreciate the phrase beginner's mindset. I especially link it to Jeff Bezos because that was really what he encouraged Amazon as they're building out Amazon.com. And, is to just imagine you're using the e-commerce for the first time and don't come in with any assumptions about what your customers might think. It builds empathy in from the beginning and it makes you customer centric. And what did Bezos say in his very first public letter to shareholders? I think the year was 1997. He's tried to write one kind of like Buffett every year since, but he said, we want to be Earth's most customer-centric company. And at the time, they were losing money on paper, and there was a lot of skepticism about Amazon, Amazon.bomb. Would they ever make money? And yet, I really do think, now looking back 30 years later, they are Earth's most customer-centric company. And look at the value that has been created from not just saying it, right? But doing it, earning it all out there on the slopes. And so I think that, that's why I particularly listen to people who have been there, done that. A lot of people seem not to like Elon Musk very much. I'm not a mega fanboy, but I'm a fan. I'm definitely a fan because I see somebody who at scale has innovated across, I would say, a shocking number of different contexts and has added gigantic value to the world. Whatever else you might think of him personally or culturally. I'm just looking at the entrepreneur. And in my case, as a shareholder, I'm looking at my Tesla shares, which I still hold and recommended to Motley Fool members. So a lot of us still hold more than 15 years ago. I was just reviewing this, Ryan, the other day on my own podcast, and I was remembering that I made a prediction. Many of my predictions don't come true, but this one did. And I put it out there on my podcast. It was October 2015. I said, I predict that the name of this public company that's run by Elon Musk, Tesla Motors, I predict one day they will drop the word motors from the name because I think people are thinking too small about what this company is actually going to be and do. And I'm happy to say within a couple of years, I did get that one right. And while you don't get any points or dollars for predicting name changes, I've actually made a lot of money for Motley Fool members by buying and holding, which is a big trick that I pull out all the time that most of the world doesn't do, buying and holding Tesla in this case. And many other great companies besides. The biggest trick for most people, and we may or may not get to my Mount Rushmore, which, by the way, I kind of made up that phrase. There's not an official list, but I always have things I can fill up with that list.
Well, rule of three. If you'll indulge, we'll go to 75 minutes. So we typically do anyway because we get going.
Totally happy to do so. But I just want to say that, the real trick for most people to make money as investors is to hold their positions longer than most of the other people around them. And by the way, if you're holding for more than a year, that's longer than most institutional Wall Street funds and managers, many of whom start with something on January 1st and they don't still own that thing the same year, December 31st. So if you already want to be in rarefied air, just think more than a year. You're well past Wall Street at this point, and yet you've not even gotten started if you're listening to Rule Breakers and Motley Fools and how to really invest. And so, part of the magic of Tesla is not predicting a name change or having a good year. It's actually holding for 15 years. And by the way, for 5 solid years, like 2013 to 18, Tesla went sideways. Like the market is rising. It was a great bull market. And literally, I think many people will forget this now that Tesla is basically $1 trillion company and is a world beater. Even though it still has a lot of questions and, what is Tesla today and what will it be going forward? It's not like it's a sure thing at all. But people may forget that you literally were holding your stock in the face of the market doubling and it was flat for a 5-year period there. And yet we were still holding and we didn't know what would happen, but we are constantly being rewarded for holding longer than most other people. And not just anything, Ryan, but of course, quality. We're holding the rule breakers. We're not holding cyclical stocks or, as you mentioned earlier, cigar butt stocks or meme stocks. I wouldn't even want to touch those things. I'm looking for greatness and I'm going to hold it. And I'm going to be willing to be proven wrong when things turn out not to be great. But when they are great, nothing else really mattered.
Love that. And I'm struck by your comment about Jeff Bezos. And I haven't read that quote, but as you were sharing that, I was wondering, you referenced your humility coming from, difficulty and challenges that you endured. And I think we all, in different ways, totally get that. But as I thought about Jeff Bezos at that year, when did you say it was it 96?
1997.
97.
The company came public in 1997. So, anybody could fact check me, but I believe it was therefore his first public letter to shareholders from that young CEO.
So when you said that, I was thinking that humility can also come from a different source, which is actually audacity. And if your goal, for example, is to be the best in the world at something, and you become the best in the United States, somebody might say to you, how do you stay so humble when you're the best in the United States? And the answer to humility might be, well, yeah, but I want to be the best in the world and I'm not even close.
Yeah.
And I think with these really great leaders like you, like Elon Musk, like Jeff Bezos, I wonder if their goals for themselves are so big that they never feel like they've won, and whether that is also a source of humility for some people.
I appreciate those thoughtful words, and we're just sort of exploring. And for our listeners, I want to make it very clear, I don't consider myself an amazingly humble person, nor do I consider myself an expert on humility. So, and I don't want play one on TV either, but I do have 2 thoughts quickly back about humility. One of them is, I think a lot of us are taught or instructed that humility is thinking less of yourself. Ryan, you're such a great skier. No, I'm not. But I have learned that humility, another take on it, and I think in a lot of ways, what I try to do as a fool is reframe the conventional wisdom. And it's not that I'm always coming up with these ideas. I just cotton to them. If somebody else says something very contrary, and I'm like, that's true, then to me, that's almost the greatest insight we could have. Because if everybody already thinks of something some way, even if they're right, there's not a lot of value created.
Right.
If we're just saying, yeah, humility is, you're totally right, it's being modest. The real value is created when you go, no, it's actually something different. Or, in addition, humility, another way of reframing it is, it's not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking more of others. And if you really think of humility that way, it never ends. It doesn't actually matter how much you've succeeded because you're always just thinking more of others. And it's not that you think more of them than yourself. You can think a lot of yourself. We need to start by loving ourselves. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard to love others or be lovable. So most of us need to start by loving ourselves and making sure that that is true. And I hope if your parents have done a good job, that's how you should think about things. But it's really about admiring and valuing and recognizing, as you did on our podcast day. Haley, right up front, Ryan, that was very admirable to me. Like right up front, you're like, now let's talk up somebody that's connected us. And she deserves it. And you're right. She's a humble person too. But that's thinking more of others. So if I have two quick thoughts about humility, that's the first longer one, that it's not just talking yourself down or modestly saying, no, you're wrong, I'm not great at this thing. It's thinking more of them, who they are. But the second thought about humility is, actually, it's as much about winning as it is about humility. Often we frame winning in these terms: champion, number one, beat somebody else, winner. It's all about that person. And usually it's that they emerged. March Madness, we're still talking here as we record just before college basketball is closing out its season. Who's going to be the national champion? The only one left standing. And that's how the tournament, which I love, by the way, plays out every year. And as I've aged and where I am now, the eyes that I see and try to proceed forward with in my actions is it's not about winning for yourself. I mean, we admire people who, like the Richard Gere character in Officer and a Gentleman, are like sharks. They're out there. They're amazing. They're out there. They're grizzly bears. They can get it done on their own. They are the one. Like there's always a cowboy mentality that we in America will admire about individualism. And I certainly was raised in that tradition as well. But who are the most valuable people on earth? It's not the person with the gold medal specifically, and I don't mean Olympic at all. The most valuable people are the ones who are winning for everyone around them. And at the heart of conscious capitalism is that win, win, win mentality, which you know, because it's one of the four foundations of conscious capitalism. But as I think about the rest of my life, I've won a lot, and I've certainly won for myself. But what I'm really trying to do is win for others. And that whether that's people who follow my advice, buying the stock, who come to me and say, I retired early because I followed you on Netflix. That makes me really happy. Or for our employees, our companies, our stakeholders, our shareholders. So I less admire the lone gun, the gunslinger who's amazing. And I more and more deeply admire and aspire to be, from a place of humility perhaps, not the amazing winner that we are, but actually the winner for our community, for the people around, for our family to start with. That when we win, others are feeling that win. And to close this potential rant, I apologize for the length of it. I will just point out that when you create a company and you go public or create value, and it's not just that you won because you IPO'd, that's when I buy your stock. I don't actually care that you had a great exit on your IPO. That doesn't matter a jot to me. All that matters to me is what happens the second day you're public and every year thereafter. And any great stock I've ever picked was in that context. And what I love about capitalism and conscious capitalism is founders create organizations that, with their employees, with their customers, of course, sometimes their communities, often their shareholders, always all of them together, we win together. It's not that Jeff Bezos was the big winner and nobody else won because he eliminated everyone else and we admire him for his medal. So that to me is connected to humility. It's as much about winning, though.
Certainly related. And it's kind of full circle because before we did the podcast this morning, Haley wrote you and I an email. It's really short. But Haley says, oh my gosh, y'all, she's from Austin, Texas. Can't you just hear her say this? Y'all.
Yes.
Y'all are going to have the best, all caps, conversation, ... I wish I could be a fly on the wall, but I'll just have to wait with the rest of the world. And then she says, David, I printed out this quote from you. I love it. It's been hanging on my wall by my desk for the past month. Thank you for being such a good human. Hope I'll get to see you again at the CEO Summit, the Conscious Capitalism Summit in October. The quote reads from you, David Gardner, co-founder, the Motley Fool, author of Rule Breaker Investing. It says, quote, if you serve first, success often follows. If you chase success first, you might lose your soul. So we've got like 10 minutes. Tell me why you wrote that and why is it on Haley's wall and what was going on when you wrote this?
Well, it's funny because the most significant piece of writing that I think I've ever done is my final stock market book, which is called Rule Breaker Investing, and it came out September, so a few months ago. And I left it all out there on the field using an athletic metaphor. I'm not going to write any more stock market books. That was my sum total of what I think I've learned, trying to share with anybody else who would like to break the rules along with me, who sees a third way, not the Bogle way, although we admire that, not the Buffett way, although we admire that, but the way that led me to NVIDIA and Amazon and Tesla, etc. And so in that book, I tried to put every great line I could think of that I'd ever come up with or heard, and I don't think that line appears in the book. So as you read me, Haley's email, which by the way, I had seen she sent us an email, but I hadn't read that email yet. So I was like, what's been up on our wall? That came specifically from a podcast by my dear friend Mahan Tavakoli called Partnering Leadership, which is, he's more of an executive coach kind of a figure. He's not a private equity person, but he has had many admirable, wonderful people, himself being one of the most admirable that I know, on his podcast, Partnering Leadership. And the line that I'm now looking at Haley's email, the line she's quoting was what I said on Mahan's podcast. I guess I would say from a place of humility, Ryan, I had forgotten that I'd said that. Like I couldn't have identified the source of that. But I guess from a place of confidence, I'm not surprised I said it because I think all the time outside the lines. I try to take a right-brained approach in a left-brained world. In a world where computer algorithms are trying to beat the market, I'm trying to use the things that computer algorithms don't use in order to pick stocks. A quick example would be there's no number that expresses the value of CEOs. Nowhere in the financial statements. One of the profound insights I came up with, which I dropped into my book, is just think about that. You and I have talked about Jeff Bezos. There's no number to express the value of Jeff Bezos. Therefore, if you're actually using financial statements and developing computer algorithms based on ratios and financial statements, you're literally not factoring in who's running the company. Which means that every great leader is running an overvalued stock because the ratios are saying, why would it be trading at that multiple? I don't see the cash flow coming. My discounted cash flow forecast doesn't suggest you should ever buy Starbucks. And yet, and again, this is maybe, if I have a Mount Rushmore of insights, this would be one of them. And yet, most of the most important things in investing and business and in life cannot be captured as numbers. There are no numbers for the things that matter most. Therefore, if you're using numbers to value stocks and picking stocks based on your personal valuation metrics, you're actually missing it. And I think, again, I know I'm speaking to founders here. Those of us who work within companies and understand the importance of a corporate culture to outcomes, or who value brands and reputations, or even just character without going too deep here, realize that these are not even being factored in by most people's zigs and zags on the charts, the technical analysis they're doing. Or if you're pitching VCs as a founder, they're not really, actually VCs understand this better than most, but so many people are numerically driven these days. And so they're kind of missing things like, if you serve first, success often follows. If you chase success first, you might lose your soul, which is, Haley, I'm honored that, Haley, you would have that up near your computer. And so while I didn't remember saying that, I'm glad I did. And I would say with confidence, it flows from somebody who that's the level that I think and operate on. And by the way, you might think it's naive or small f foolish. Turns out it beats the heck out of the market in a world where many people are coached and taught you could never beat the stock market averages. So if there's a Mount Rushmore in sight, there it is.
All right. Well, we've got two of them now. We've got like three to 5 minutes, and then both of us are going to turn into pumpkins. But give us your last. It's scary to say it's your last piece of advice, but I think you know what I mean. Like if there were three, we've done two. One, winning requires lots of losing, and get over it and embrace it. Two is this notion of the humility of serving others and its contribution to success, which isn't a numerical exercise. Let's do a third, and then we'll wrap it up.
Sure. One of the early essays that I wrote as an investor, as a younger person, is entitled Dark Clouds I Can See Through. And this will be a third one, and I'll keep it short. Thank you so much for your time, Ryan, and especially our listeners. You and I have had fun. I hope the listeners have had fun and are still listening. So to those who are, Dark Clouds I Can See Through is a reminder that you and your own unique viewpoint might be some of the most value you have to offer the world, and prize that. So dark clouds I can see through. I, many times, especially as a younger person who didn't have a track record of success, in order to pick stocks, you need time to pass to show whether you were right or wrong. So I could say things as we did in early Motley Fool books. Here's what I'm doing. I'm going to break the rules. But you would still read it and go, well, that sounds good. But the guy's like in his early 30s, don't really know if that's going to work. But now I'm happy to say I've entered a phase of my life where it's out there. I have a public track record of 30 plus years. My cost basis on Amazon is 16 cents. My cost basis on NVIDIA, ironically and coincidentally, thanks to the magic of stock splits, is also 16 cents. So, and I still hold those positions, still holding. So it's worked. And especially when I looked at Amazon back in the day, or NVIDIA back in the day, everybody was like, you know what? It's not going to work out. For Amazon, it was e-commerce is never going to work out. Also, they're losing money hand over fist. This thing's going Amazon.bomb cover of Barron's. For NVIDIA, it was they started out as a computer graphical card company, largely to increase the benefit of video gamers. I'm a video gamer, by the way. I love games of all kinds. And I remember that it was all about having an NVIDIA card to make better graphics for your computer game. Not even video game, because it was just computers back then. Anyway, how could that ever be like that big a deal? And in both cases, I was like, I think I see the dark clouds. Like people are saying these stocks are overvalued. And it's kind of like the cartoon Saturday morning, right? Where the cartoon character would have just Charlie Brown, just a dark cloud over their head with lightning and rain coming down on their head. But if you can actually look at that and see through it and go, you know what? I actually don't think that dark cloud is real. I think people are missing something, or I see something else. I can see through that dark cloud, and I won't, because we're being brief here, I won't explain what that was for Amazon or NVIDIA, but I think it's fairly obvious. You can fill in the dots yourself at this point. But when you have that kind of insight and you can translate that into value creation, that is one of the most beautiful dynamics that you can identify, cultivate, and prize. And so another way I've sometimes heard it said is, Ryan Heckman, listener, what is something that you believe that most people don't believe? That's just a great water cooler, happy hour question for anybody. And you can ask it at any point and always get interesting answers. It's one of my favorite beautiful questions to ask. What is something you believe that most people don't believe? And ... if you can turn that belief into a product or service, turn that belief into a company, found something on that principle, and then go on to earn a profit at it, that is a very powerful dynamic. And what I've realized now as an older person, unbeknownst to the young David Gardner as we started the Motley Fool, is here's the thing I always believed that most people still don't believe. I believe you can beat the stock market averages. And from day one, when we launched the Motley Fool, and you encountered us in year one, August 4th of 1994, we put $50,000 of our own money right out front. And we said, we're going to invest in front of America. Follow us at keyword Fool on AOL. You're going to see our ups and our downs, our wins and our losses. We believe You can beat the market. By the way, we're in our 20s and people are calling us naive and we're saying we're fools. Why would you listen to AOL chat rooms? And that's often how people kind of portrayed us, especially like the Wall Street media. And I believe, and I still do believe, you can beat the market averages. In fact, it's a lot easier than you're ever led to believe. It's just you have to take a certain approach. And I've tried to do that ever since. So the Motley Fool, in a sense, was built on that belief that most people don't believe. So it's a dark cloud you can see through. I know I'm speaking to founders. I know I'm speaking to you, Ryan. When you have an insight, Ryan Heckman, that, private equity would actually be better if we cared more about the private part of real people as opposed to the straight equity numbers of things. If you actually cared more about humanity and what leads to the decisions that lead to the products, et cetera, you might have an edge. And that would be an example. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I'm just trying to imagine things forward from where you are and what you've been doing. But for each of us, if you believe something that most people don't believe, if it's a dark cloud you can see through, prize that. That may very well be the greatest contribution you can make to the rest of us. And you might create untold value as Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos. There will never be an electric car, the world said. E-commerce will never work. My earliest interviews on CNN, it was coming back. We're going to have somebody who thinks you will give your credit card to someone over the internet back after this, right? And so when you believe and other people don't, that's where huge value is created.
Let's drop the mic together on that one. Thanks for the 77 minutes you've given me and our listeners, David. This is such, as I started this conversation, this is so quintessential why I felt a calling to do this podcast, and it's enriched my life. And I know if it enriched mine, it will certainly enrich others. And thank you for being such a fool over so many years and the lessons that you've taught us by the way you have lived your life. And thanks for this time.
Keep up the great work, Ryan. And for all of us, try to win for as many people as you can. There is deep fulfillment and value creation therein.
Awesome.